Do you ever feel like you're hustling for love or a sense of belonging? On this episode of Compass, we're breaking down what it means to be truly unbound, free to experience grace, presence, and authentic connection. Welcome back to Compass, finding spirituality in the everyday. In this episode, we meet Caroline Vogel, therapist, author, longtime mindfulness practitioner, and author of As Yourself, the sacred work of embodying grace. Our conversation with Caroline touches the intersection of spirituality, psychology, and vulnerability, hitting on topics like the communal nature of healing or the challenges of accepting grace and wrestling with our inner critics and the ongoing invitation to turn towards suffering with compassion. So whether you're seeking tools for self-kindness, or you're wondering how to break free from that hustle for love, or you're simply longing for connection in a world that's becoming increasingly lonely, this episode might just offer wisdom and encouragement for the journey. If conversations like this are helpful for your spiritual journey, we'd be incredibly grateful if you could take a break to leave us a rating and review. Your feedback not only helps us improve the show, but it also makes a huge difference in helping others like you find what they're looking for in Compass. All right, let's get unbound with Caroline Vogel on Compass. Well, Caroline, thanks for taking the time to join us here on the Compass podcast. How goes it with your soul today?
My soul is good as long as I'm staying in the present moment close to home.
Mm, mm. All right. So an invitation here then, because a lot of us have a hard time not being distracted out of the present moment. How do you kind of keep yourself grounded in the present moment in the day to day?
So I have been a longtime practitioner of mindfulness. And because I have historically had a very wandering mind, and I think it's true too. The saying is, if your mind wanders too far into the future, you're pretty anxious. If it wanders too far into the past, you're pretty depressed.
Hmm.
And so at some point, it's actually when my kids were little. I was like, I really want to learn to stay in the present moment. Otherwise, I feel like it's just going to all pass me by. Um, so yeah, about 20 years ago, I started practicing mindfulness intentionally because I wanted to stay in the present moment. So I do little things throughout my day to try to bring me into the present moment, whether it's slowing my breathing down or just asking myself, like, where am I right now? Am I here? Or
Hmm.
because I can be pretty spacey, which my children would tell you too. Um,
Okay.
but I also am lucky in that I do work that I really love, and my day job is not as a writer; it's a therapist, and
Yeah.
um, I really enjoy my work, and it's actually quite easy for me to stay in the present moment if I'm listening to someone else.
Hmm.
Left with my own brain, I can go anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, but small practices like checking in with myself and slowing my breathing down um, help me to stay more connected to being right here.
Well, in our present moment, we've just entered into the Easter season. Easter Sunday was this previous weekend as we're recording this. And resurrection is one of the key ideas that you address in your writings, or at least in your most recent book, As Yourself.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry to kind of jump to the end of the book for the beginning of
No,
our
it's great.
conversation, but
Yeah.
at the end, you offer this powerful image in Lazarus being called out of the tomb and being unbound, not just by Jesus, but by being unbound by kind of this community. And that idea of being unbound is intriguing because it's not just about like the removal of the physical
Right.
bindings, so to speak. There's something else happening there. And a
Right.
lot of us can feel locked into like the expectations or the implied demands, and that's maybe what distracts our minds and takes us off into the future or back into that nostalgic past. We can be bound by societal oppression. So I'd love for you to maybe expound the idea of unbound for us a little
Yeah.
bit more. Like, what does it look like for a person today to be unbound?
I love this question, Ryan. Because I think that there's so many different ways that we are both bound and
Mm,
therefore can become unbound. And, as a therapist, by day, I I work a lot with people and what binds them, whether it be their cognition,
mm,
whether it be a stress response that rolls around in their body, whether it be thought patterns, right? Um, our beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs about God, our beliefs about other people, the narratives that we write, regardless of how much fact is involved in the narrative that we're
mm,
telling ourselves. Um, and so, any number of these things alone or collectively have a way of binding us, right? Like this, just think about the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves,
mhm,
whether it's our history or our present moment, um, can really play a profound effect about whether we know ourselves to be bound or whether we have a felt sense of being bound. Um, and so, yeah, and like you said, there's so many different ways in which society binds people with expectations, with laws, with policy. I was really when I was thinking about your questions last night, I really found myself thinking about that the most, right? Like
mm,
there are things we have agency over and with, and there are things in which it takes far more than one human being to be able to unbind,
mm.
whether it's an individual or a group of people. And just, that can be a tricky place in terms of agency.
Can you tell us a little bit about the communal unbinding and
Mm.
what that looks like? Especially, I think we've heard about the epidemic of loneliness in this
Yeah.
age, and so how do we see, or how do you see the communal aspect of unbinding in action now?
Well, and again, I'm gonna, as a trauma therapist, I'm gonna answer a lot of your questions coming from this perspective because I
Sure.
think it
Yeah.
speaks a lot to the world in which we live in right now. And so when we do clinical work around trauma, we do it with the transparency, the recognition that trauma happens in relationship and we heal in relationship, right?
Mm,
Because trauma is
hmm,
both what happens to you, but it's also what does not happen for you. And so as social creatures, we really need each other in the healing process. And so, being unbound is, I think we like in this very individualistic um, world and community, certainly here in the West, that we really put this emphasis on we're going to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we're going to
hmm, hmm,
do this and that and the other. And it's not to undermine anyone's agency because we need that. And as social creatures, we have to respect the fact that we also need each other. And so I think there really is something to be said about, Jesus could have unbound Lazarus. The Holy Spirit could have unbound, those wrappings. But there's something powerful, and I've been thinking about it for years, that Jesus said, no, he says to the community, unbind him
yeah.
and let him go, right? And that's really stuck with me. I'm an oldest child. My spouse is like, you're a lone wolf. He's kind of a lone wolf too.
Okay.
Um, we're like 2 lone wolves in the world. We just were having a conversation about that actually this weekend. Anyway, it can be a powerful, like, myth to live into this, like, "I got this," right? And so much of my own personal healing and the healing that I engage and have the privilege of journeying alongside other people is that we do it in connection with other people.
Hmm,
Right? It's like I always say that our thinking brain can only take us so far into safety, right? We really need our emotional brain to help with that. And I think there's only so much we can heal in isolation, in our individualism.
Mm.
I don't know if
Um,
that answers your question.
it it does, and well, it gets me thinking about uh, maybe this was my mind wandering a bit, but our relationship to sin, and that as you were
Mm,
talking about Jesus calling the community together to unbind somebody.
mhm.
One of the ways that we tend to interpret sin is that it's something that either tears us away from God or it's something that tears us away from each other, right?
Yes.
And Jesus, especially in certain gospels, like say the Gospel of Luke, uh, it's he's all about the forgiveness of sins. And in some ways, you can say like, oh well, he's giving this proclamation. He's saying that your sins are forgiven, but in other ways, he's making an observation. I think. Specifically, I think
Mm.
about the story where the friends lower the paraplegic through the ceiling, and
Mhm, mhm.
and Jesus says, "Your sins are forgiven," and he gets in trouble for that. But part of what I believe in is happening in that story is that he's observed this person's friends like coming together in community to provide this for him. Like there's nothing separating them from each other. He's offering this observation, like, "Oh, your sins are forgiven," and so that it
Oh,
it
I
begins to
love that
speak. And
interpretation.
yeah, in one of the ways in which we begin to process through healing then is in that communal restoration, that sense of maybe being unbound from the things that we've been torn away from and rebound into one another's relationship. And
Yeah, yeah, and I think that what gets a little tricky there, um, is choosing wisely and being mindful of who is safe to
mhm,
rebound to,
yes,
right?
yeah, mhm,
Um, because not every situation allows for is safe in trying to provide that reconnection
yeah,
or connection. Yeah,
yeah. Sometimes forgiveness has to be practiced at a distance. Correct. That.
correct,
Yeah, okay.
correct. Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. I think there has to be real wise discernment there.
mm.
Yeah.
You've talked about this claiming of agency, and in relating that to grace, like I remember
Mhm.
I was a youth minister for a long time, and I remember trying to describe grace to students once, and I came up with what I thought was this brilliant analogy of that God loves you. There's nothing you can do about that. And the smart aleck in the back of the room goes, "Oh," but trying to describe grace is sort of this sense that God's love is without agency, and that it's just there. It's
Oh,
coming
God's love
after
is without
us.
agency. Uh-huh.
However, however, we
That
have
sounds
the
kinda scary.
agency,
It's coming
right?
after us. Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, this sort of creepy. No, it's a non-threatening love. I want to, but
Right.
however, we have the agency then to choose whether we respond to that love or not. And that choosing to respond to that love offers a sense of vulnerability, or calls us into a place of vulnerability because it's being so deeply loved. Well, I'm sorry to quote back what you've written here, but I just love this quote that we're going to have to open ourselves to the vulnerability of being so deeply loved by God that it changes everything about us.
Mhm.
And that sounds lovely. It
It
also
does.
sounds challenging and maybe
Mhm.
even intimidating to a lot of us because, well, that change part of it. So, why? I don't know. Can you speak to a little bit about like why is that so difficult for us? What is the vulnerability that's involved in allowing ourselves to be changed by God's love?
Well, I think it goes back to a piece of what we've already started talking about, which is sin, right?
Mm,
And we oftentimes think of sin as what separates us from the love of God, right?
yeah.
And maybe from the love of each other and humanity, the love of ourselves. Um, And I think that there's this really close relationship for most of us around sin and shame, right? So sin might be the behavior, the action, the words themselves, but then shame is like the emotional response that we have to the shame, or to the sin, I mean.
Mm,
Um, both both emotional but also mental too, right? The cognition around, like Brene Brown talks about shame as is the feeling that we're unworthy of love and belonging.
mm,
And I think, historically, Christianity, we have viewed sin as that which, marks us as unworthy of love and belonging. And so then to put ourselves into a different form of theology of, okay, well, wait a minute, am I going to actually allow myself to think that no matter what I've done, no matter what I've said, no matter what Romans, nothing can separate me from the love of God.
mm,
Okay. Whoa. Well, there's a gap, right? Between, well, but we say sin is what separates me. And now I'm trying to sit with, well, maybe it doesn't separate me.
mhm.
And how do I deal with that disconnect? Right.
Yeah.
Um, and for so many of us, shame can feel so strong that it takes us into like a fight, flight, freeze, fawn
Mm,
response,
mhm,
right? Like in that overwhelm of, oh my gosh, I'm not worthy of love and belonging. I'm not worthy of connection. And so to challenge that, I think is incredibly vulnerable for humanity to
mm,
go, well, okay. Well, first of all, I'm having to challenge that belief if someone grew up with that belief that it has separated me. But even if no one did have that, I think there's something inherent about being human and questioning and feeling as if we're not worthy of connection and having a loving God, a theology that says, no, 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 even in that. And it's like, I think that's something that, like, works against how we're wired,
yeah.
right? And I think that that challenge is meant to be a challenge. I don't think it's happenstance. I don't think it's a coincidence.
Okay. Uh, can you say why it's meant to be a challenge? Have you
Well,
observed
I've
maybe the
always yeah, I've always wondered, like, it's part of what it's part of the beauty of the tether with God, right?
mm,
Like, it's part of our humanity to allow ourselves to wrestle with this. I mean, I think of Jacob and the angel. I'm always going back to Jacob and the angel. Um, but, all he wants is that blessing.
mm, mhm,
And, there's a part of me that's like, it's already inside you. But he needs that physical wrestling with whether it's the angel or, whatever that form represents. And, finally the angel's like, "Okay, fine. I'll bless you." And he like knocks his hip out of his
mm,
socket and he walks away blessed, limping, right?
mm,
And
hmm,
I was just thinking this morning because of a conversation I was having, I was just thinking like, I think the limp was because Jacob needed constant reminder of the blessing, of the
okay.
grace, right? Like his hip was constantly reminding him, "Oh, wait, grace is here.
Mm.
I can live out of that grace." And then, I get curious about because I have a funny hip and I'm like,
Ah,
do I need to walk? You know what I
is
mean?
that your reminder?
Yes. Is
Well,
this my
that shoots down my
reminder,
next
grace?
question. Yeah.
You know? Um, but I think it's inherently vulnerable. And I think of it not as a curse that it's hard for us. I think of it as part of the blessing because, like, if grace was easy for us, why would we need God? Right? Like,
Mm,
what
mm,
what effort would we make in keeping that alignment, that connection, um, that relationship? Like, what would keep us showing up? And I think God wants us to keep showing up. I
mm.
don't think it's a curse that it's a hard.
Guess bum joints aside, where do you see some of the reminders of grace or that blessing of God's presence?
Oh, this part always makes me
Or
tearful.
maybe, yeah, maybe that's diving too deep into you, but maybe
No.
within your practice, like, how do you help other people recognize, where that is?
So I'll start with myself
Okay,
of,
cool.
um, you know, I'm not sure actually I'm thinking of your question correctly, but I'm gonna dive in and you let me know if I need to scoot a little bit somewhere,
Sure.
one way or another. Um, but so much of grace, I'm reminded of grace in my life in connection with other people, right?
Mm,
Like
okay, yeah.
my community. I have a dear friend. Just the other day, we were talking about this kind of over the Easter weekend. I experienced so much grace in her friendship, and I certainly experienced so much grace with my kids, and for my significant other. There's a lot of reminders of the embodiment of grace,
Mm,
and things they say to me or the love of God that I experience through them. Um, and sometimes people are like, "Well, that's just love. That's just, your spouse loving you." And I'm like, "I know, but you know how like sometimes you have a dream and you feel like it's a God dream,
yeah, mhm.
right? Like it's not just what you ate for dinner the night before."
Right,
And
yeah. Yeah, that something
and
is being communicated, that yeah, there's
something's
some
been
sense of
communicated.
revelation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's some epiphany there and something like a message that God's trying to share with you. And I sometimes experience that in my connections with my loved ones. Or sometimes I'll meet someone, a total stranger, and I'll feel a connection with them and feel like God's love moving through them towards me or through me towards them. Um, and I think that that's grace. I
Mm,
think a lot of people experience and are reminded of grace in nature. And again, living
yeah.
in East Tennessee and living so close to the Smoky Mountains, or right now when everything's a bloom, yes, our allergies are wild, or most of us. But there's also such beauty in the flowers and the smell of the grass, and um, I think a lot of people connect with a sense of there's a benevolence here that doesn't necessarily that's beyond our stretch and imagination that we're mere recipients of, not because we've done anything all that great, but just because God is so abundant
Mm.
um, in the offering of love.
This runs counter to another notion that you brought up, that some of us get caught in the hustle for love.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
feel like in my moment of self revelation, like I think I'm prone to fall into that habit of feeling like I need to I need to earn it.
oh yeah,
um, you know,
yeah,
in that moment where Jacob was like, "Yeah, I'm going to wrestle with this. We're going to fight hard at it." I feel like I need to walk away with that limp in a sense, like I got to
yes,
fight for it to get it. So and that resonates with me. So maybe asking partially on behalf of myself, but also in
yeah.
recognizing that there are a whole lot of other people who feel like, yeah, I'm caught in the hustle for love as well. Can you talk about some first steps towards like really living as someone who is
Yeah.
already loved?
Yeah. So two powerful things I think are tremendous starting parts. One I think is easier than the other.
Mm,
One is and the one I think is a little bit easier is allowing yourself to notice. Like to
mm,
even like stop yourself long enough to go, "Why am I doing this?"
yeah. Okay.
Or "Why am I doing this?" Just that little tiny pause where you ask yourself the question, right? And then the second part, which I think is more difficult, which I'm sure says a lot about me. But for also all the people that I wrote this book for, is to offer compassion to
Mm,
yourself. Like, oh, so not to beat yourself up for the hustle, because I think that's our tendency, right? Like,
yeah.
oh,
Okay.
I'm hustling again,
Yeah. Oh, there
or
I go again. You
"Ooh,
get caught in that
there I go
rumination.
again,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
But could we bring like a playful curiosity, some even twinged with compassion of, oh my gosh, there I go again,
Mm,
right? Um, because my experience is we learn the hustle for really good reasons, right? And at some point,
mm,
the hustle even probably has worked for us. Most of us can look back in our life and go, ooh, the hustle really paid off here. The
Yeah.
hustle really paid off there. That's real. And that's a lot to let go of. And so I think most of us have to have compassion first for, it really did, it served a purpose. And we can even feel gratitude
Okay.
for how it worked for us. But so many of us get to a point, I think it's actually part of the grace of aging, is to go, I don't want to have to hustle anymore.
Hmm.
Right? Like that
Yeah.
doesn't, even if it worked for me in the past, it's not worth the cost now. Like it's actually starting to get me away from or get in the way of how I'm trying to do relationship, how I'm trying to do my vocational life, how I'm trying to show up in my faith, right? To
Mm,
rely on my hustle means to some degree I've got to own that I'm not relying on my community. I'm not relying on a
mm.
loving God. Yeah. I mean, some of us get to the point where, I mean, I think this has probably been part of my journey too, and just in aging and going, I can't hustle like I used to,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like, and to some degree, thank God I can't
Right.
because it's pushed my theology in really good ways. I mean, one of my little mantras for the longest time was like, "Oh, I'm not 26 anymore." With like, and now I'm trying to be like, God, thank God I'm not 26 anymore.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Right? There's something about it can be really hard to push up against that edge where I I my being, whether it's physically, emotionally, mentally, I can't hustle like I used to, so I'm gonna have to figure out something else, which then also pushes me to go, "Whoa, was that hustle good theology or was that me getting
Mm,
by?"
yeah. Well, that's giving yourself grace, certainly,
Mhm.
which you've noted as part of living a life that it embodies grace. I think when we tend to hear words like that, embodying grace, like when we're talking about other people, we think about, oh, well, they're just so kind, right? They
Mm,
treat
mhm,
other people well. Uh,
mhm.
but you're calling us back to embodying grace, not just in treating other people well, but also treating ourselves well in the ways
Right.
that we extend um, a loving presence, loving acknowledgement towards ourselves. Can you offer some advice for those who are challenged by that idea of extending grace to themselves? Particularly those of us who are highly self-critical or hard on
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the idea, I'm going to speak of this first real fast because I think it's an important lead in
Yeah.
to the fullness of what you're asking about is embodiment. The reason why that became such an important aspect for me in talking about grace is because I got tired of words only. I got tired of,
Mhm.
um, I believe in grace in my head, right? Or I can extend grace through the thoughts I'm having about somebody, or I can extend grace in the prayers that I have for someone, or I can hold a certain situation for myself mentally, right, with grace. Um, and I think based on the theology of Maundy Thursday, we are called to something so much more radically deep and meaningful
Mm.
than our minds, right?
Mm.
But I think in Western culture, we have prized the mind so much that we find
Yeah.
it even superior to the wisdom of the body or the wisdom of our hearts or the wisdom of our spirit, our soul, right? And so embodiment is goes back to staying connected to our bodies, right? So many of us fly
Mm.
off into our heads without even knowing it, and sometimes for really good reason, right?
Mm.
But like there's a felt sense, like when you talked about someone being so kind, right? Like you actually, I don't know if you even knew this, but there was an embodiment. I could see it in your eyes, right? There's a different kind of
Mm.
way in which that is conveyed, right? And the thing is, we believe people's actions and we oftentimes and should struggle with just what people say, right?
Mm,
Actions speak. Our bodies speak. Our bodies carry the love of God that we're called to, as Jesus said on Maundy Thursday, love one another as I have loved you.
mm,
It's not just this idea of love. It's this felt sense of I have loved you. And it's from that place of touching and washing your feet and being
mm,
with you in the hard times. It's out of that lived place that I want you loving each other. And so I think that for people who struggle with, a strong inner critic, I think there's a variety of ways to get in it. One is having compassion. It's gonna sound counterintuitive at first, but in the beginning, like, really starting to have some compassion for that inner critic, all it's trying to do is to keep you safe,
mm.
right? All it's trying to
Wow.
do is loving on you in a real difficult way, right? It's
Yeah.
creating
Okay.
pain, but at the heart of it, all it's trying to do is love you. It's just trying to
Hmm.
be a good friend to you and trying to keep you safe and trying to make good on a promise of keeping you secure. But it gets supersized, right? And
Yeah.
so it's then that becomes that both and though. Okay, well, can I have compassion for this inner critic? And can I also start to entertain like a felt sense of being loved? Our brain will play tricks on us all day long.
Mm.
Our body does not lie to us.
Huh.
So the
Okay.
more we can stay grounded and connected with our bodies and the wisdom that's there that God gave us, that the Spirit breathes through, the more capable we are of offering grace to ourselves. Does that answer your question? It's maybe a little bit more
It does.
complicated that yeah,
Yeah.
but
What one thing I'm wondering about to follow up on that is it you talked about the inner critic almost in a sense of the other, like othering the inner
yeah,
critic. I had a
yeah,
I have a friend who named his inner critic. And
love it.
does it help to extend grace? Like if we kind of other the inner critic in a way? Like we're
I
not
think
talking to
so.
ourselves now, we're talking to
A
somebody
part of
else.
us,
Yeah.
right? Well, it creates, I think, enough emotional, psychic distance, right, between our true self and this part of us that likes to rear its ugly head, right?
Mm,
Because the inner critic can be quite painful, even though I genuinely believe at the root of it, it's trying to do good.
yeah.
It just gets really, really busy and intense at times. And so, right, by owning that it's a part of us, that's not our whole being, does allow us to create oftentimes just enough distance to be able to engage it in a different kind of way,
Mm,
right? Like, people will, when it goes back to love your neighbor as yourself, and I talk about this in the book, I was like, oh my gosh, I am way kinder to my neighbor than I
right.
am to
Yeah.
myself, at least
Yeah.
throughout my life, right? I'm like, I hope I am so much kinder to my neighbor.
Uh,
And so for lots of people, I think the challenge is to is in the self-love, is in the extending grace inward. And I think we can learn something from how we already are kind to other people. It's
mm,
like, even allowing yourself to think of a time when grace came really naturally for you, extending it to someone else. And then you notice like, okay, well, how did I feel emotionally when that was happening? What were the thoughts that were going on in my mind? What were the words that I shared with the other person? And you even maybe, writing that out a little bit and then kind of turning it and going, okay, well, what would it be like to feel those emotions towards myself and to share those words with myself?
mm,
Because you have the repertoire. So many people have the repertoire within them, right? Because they've practiced it, whether with, a life partner or a best friend or a child. that we have experience to draw on. We just don't think about turning it towards ourself. Yeah.
Hmm. Is it helpful then to think of that inner critic maybe as a child?
Well, oftentimes it was developed in childhood.
Okay. Yeah.
And so for so many of us, and it's so our emotional brain pulls for a very young part. And so yes, it would be wise to think of it as an unruly child, right?
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
almost like a bully.
Mm.
Um a young bully that's inside of us that's just trying so hard to keep us out of
Yeah.
trouble, to keep us safe. But it's so
Mm.
mean in the process. Yeah.
Um, you noted that in your writing that Jesus turned towards suffering, and that
Mhm.
we are also invited to do that as well. And that extends not just for turning towards the suffering of others, but as we've just been talking about, kind of turning towards the suffering within ourselves. Um, and that maybe can be some of the most difficult suffering to face. I'm sure that is somebody who is, I guess, a trauma informed um, therapist that yeah, that's a difficult place to invite people into.
It is.
Is there a are there ways that we can maybe begin to turn towards our own suffering, with I don't know,
Yeah,
with
I think
Jesus? So, like,
with
yeah.
Jesus, yeah, for sure. One thing is I find that helps myself and helps other people with this, Ryan, is that owning that it's hard and that it's not
Mm,
natural, right? Like
okay.
we are hardwired to turn away from pain, to turn away from our own pain, to turn away from other people's pain, right? Like that's biological. So in some ways it's like, which what a setup, right? Like
Yeah,
and
right.
so but therein is the invitation as well, right? So Jesus turned toward so many people that society had not only turned away from, but justified turning away from for whatever reason. Whether their illness was contagious or um it was they were seen as unclean or, all the different things. But and this is very much in keeping with a Buddhist mindset as well as turning towards the suffering and essentially building a window of tolerance to be with that which we find uncomfortable. So again,
Mm,
I think a first step is just to acknowledge like we're asking ourselves to do something that we're hardwired to not do,
mm,
right? Like to own
yeah,
this
okay.
is hard. Right? And we don't come with a lot of built-in capability for this. This is part of a spiritual discipline, a spiritual practice. And I think it connects to something you named earlier in our conversation, Ryan, which is this kind of pandemic of loneliness. And I think so much of loneliness happens because we don't know how to turn towards each other's pain. We don't know how to turn towards and be with our own pain.
Mm,
um, I also think there's, as Kristen Neff, she does a lot of research around, self-compassion, and she names the common humanity of suffering. And I think oftentimes as Christians, we think if we're experiencing something hard, that we're unfaithful or something's
yeah.
wrong with us. And I think that there's a lot to learn through scripture, um, that life is hard. Life is hard. It doesn't have to always be hard, but to think that we're never gonna experience pain or we're never gonna experience suffering is not meeting life on life's terms.
Mm,
Um, and so I think that there can be some stigma around we can tell ourselves narratives around, "Well, I don't wanna turn towards that pain because it means something's wrong with me." Well, it may just be that life has you by the neck right now.
yeah.
And that
Mm,
doesn't mean anything's wrong with you. That just means life's got a hold of you. Welcome to life.
mm,
Life can be, and turns out is a four-letter word.
mm, mm,
So to allow ourselves to go, the common humanity, that recognition of, okay, all right, it doesn't mean that I'm bad or wrong because I'm experiencing life is hard right now, or my mind is hard, or my emotions are hard, or this situation or relationship is hard. But can I allow myself to be with it? Trusting that Jesus is here with me, that the Spirit is breathing through me and whoever else is involved, right? To show up in this moment. We don't, it's one of the most amazing things about being a Christian is we don't have to face any aspect of life alone.
Mm, mm. Um, I have one final question for you. I'm discerning what that question's gonna be. And
Okay. Okay.
I wanted to follow up on just the aspect um, of community and finding community. So,
Mhm.
since it is so important as you've named, I'm guessing that you're also pretty involved in community. What are some ways uh, that you have found your people? Like, how do you find people?
How do you find people for sure? So that's a great question. I think it's something we're struggling with, like, especially in our culture, but maybe the
Yeah.
world over to some degree.
Mm,
And how I did community for most of my life is different than how I'm doing community currently in my life.
yeah.
As an introvert, I'm really allowing myself the like honoring that community can be small for me. And in the smallness, it is more than enough.
Mm,
Like my community feels really big, even though it's very small.
mm,
And I am enjoying the joy and wonder of how God shows up in the midst of that. Um, how do I find my people? I think to some degree I got really clear on who I am and what I find fulfilling in relationship. I think I also got really clear on what I'm not okay with, which creates maybe
mm,
some uncomfortable boundaries for others. Um, I think oftentimes we think that community ought to be everyone. And to some degree it is because we're social creatures and we live in a world with
yeah.
other humans. And for me, community in terms of like how I get my emotional, mental, spiritual, soulful needs met in connection is really small. And I've built it slowly over time.
Mm,
Um, I mean, I think everybody, I mean, that grew up and, I turned 50 this year, like we expect there to be like friends, right? Like we're
right.
waiting for the series of friends to happen to us
Right.
and,
Yeah.
feel really bad if it's not. And, for me, genuine community has been built over time, very slowly. Yeah.
Mm,
And recognizing that even the power of one friendship over a meal, over coffee, walking together, um, sitting in a living room and talking, that can be community. It doesn't look the same for everybody. It can't look the same for everybody. We have different histories and dispositions and personalities and needs and triggers, right? And so but I do wanna encourage people to be mindful of what community is for them and what works for them and what doesn't. And it's
mm.
okay that not every community works for you.
Well, thank you for sharing all that with us, and for
Oh,
sharing
it's been a delight. A
for
delight,
sharing the
Ryan.
real. It's
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
thank you so much for having me. This has been really I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Good. And CarolineVogel.com is a great place
Yep.
to look up for more information. Great.
Yes.
Well, again, thank you so much for sharing your time and for sharing the good news of grace with us. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Compass Finding Spirituality in the Everyday. If you'd like to dive deeper, you can head on over to our website, umc.org/compass. There you're going to find episode notes and plenty of other episodes to explore. We also want to extend a special thank you to the team at United Methodist Communications for making this whole podcast possible. If you haven't already, again, take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review Compass on your favorite podcast platform. That, of course, helps others find us and join the conversation. Again, thanks for listening. Look forward to connecting with you again in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, peace.